Chapter 19 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 19. Leah's emotion, as she felt, was almost cruelly genuine. It bore the trademark of sincerity. It made her heart hammer furiously against her ribs and drove the blood from her cheeks. Yet she knew that Jim still lived, that the lying cablegram was but a necessary card to play for the winning of large stakes. For once the expected had happened, that was all. Why, then, should she exhibit emotions which could not possibly have been caused by the excuse offered to the public? Her heart replied with brutal directness that she had crossed the Old Bailey Rubicon and was actually participating in a crime. The last word shook her out of cotton-wool wrappings into a naked world. Up to the receipt of the cablegram she could have drawn back. Now, fully committed to the adventure, she was compelled to tread a perilous path. A criminal, yes. She had been one in intention, which mattered little. She was now criminal in fact, and that meant punishment. Her imagination conjured up visions of the possible. The judge spoke, the prison gaped, the bolts shot home. Curzon Street was exchanged for Wormwood Scrubs. Ugh! But after all, such queasy thoughts were unnecessary. If she had broken the 8th commandment, she fully intended to keep the 11th and unwritten one, "Thou shalt not be found out." The truth to Mrs. Saracen, excusing a hasty departure, served to circulate the fiction of Jim's death, which the widow wished to be speedily and widely known. She could not have selected a bell with a better clapper. Promulgated by the Sauce Queen, the sad invention shortly became town talk, and disseminated by myriad tongues, ran like a prairie fire throughout society, with a capital letter. A more weighty bag on the postman's back resulted, and commiserating platitudes showered on Leah, as thick as the over-quoted leaves of Vallombrosa. She glanced through many, replied to a few, and burned very wisely the majority. Between whiles her attention was given to parcels from Jay's, and considerations of widows' caps, and the recognition that the feminine uniform of woe clothed with marked distinction a really beautiful mourner. To women, grief has its consolations in crape millinery. Seclusion was necessary in those days of lamentation, but none the less wearisome. To play the nun, while people scattered to Cowes and the Continent, chafed the chameleon woman. Some intimate sympathizers she received, and to these she matched mournful words with a mournful countenance. With the blinds half down, and sal volatile at hand, in a becoming gown, and using a handkerchief 3 inches black bordered to redden the driest of eyes, Lady Jim held funereal receptions, and spoke in low tones of her late husband's hitherto unknown good qualities. His palpable evils she cloaked with the "his own worst enemy" phrase, and mentioned twice that if not an angel, he at least had been a man. The visitor addressed made her exit expressing hopes that Lord James was an angel now, and the door closed in time to prevent her seeing Leah's enjoyment of the picture thus cast on her amused mind. "Jim an angel!" murmured the widow, wiping away real tears. He'd bet on his flying. With the Duke she played her comedy of sorrow very prettily. Pentland and Frith arrived in haste, while the Marchioness hurried on beforehand to prepare Leah for the interview. But she was already word perfect in her part, aware that Lord Frith would discredit ostentatious grief, she assumed the position of a shocked rather than a broken-hearted widow, though she said nothing but what might have been inscribed on Jim's tombstone. Not a crocodile tear did she shed under Frith's too observant eyes, but sat near the Duke, holding his gouty lean hand, and skilfully impressed the trio with the belief that she and the deceased had not been so far asunder as was supposed, the corollary of such impression being that she honestly regretted Jim's untimely demise. No more could be expected even from the most forgiving woman, and no more was demanded by the ducal family. After these preliminary condolences, Pentland suggested that Leah should come to Firmingham for the funeral. It was necessary to agree to this, and she did, with graceful readiness, only intimating that she would remain in town until the remains arrived at Southampton. Even as she made the stipulation, she wondered how Demetrius had contrived to transfer Garth's body from Madeira to Jamaica for the deception. "I thought poor Jim would have been buried where he died," she remarked tentatively. The Duke was shocked. "Certainly not. Jim, poor fellow, must rest with his ancestors. We must look upon his face for the last time." Leah plucked nervously at her black gown, and wondered if the Russian was wise in submitting a substituted corpse to family scrutiny. "They say that death changes people," she ventured uneasily, "and of course embalming—" "Just what I said to Bunny," interrupted Lady Frith, in too vivacious a tone for the occasion. "We shall hardly know Jim with the soul out of him." "My dear Hilda!" "Well, Bunny, you know souls aren't buried." "They go to a better world, as Jim's has gone," mourned the doting father. Frith looked doubtfully at his sister-in-law. The less said about Jim's destination the better. Therefore did he crush sentiment with dry business. "I expect Demetrius will arrive with the remains about the end of the month," said he, in the hardest of voices. "After the funeral we can see about the will." "It leaves everything to Leah," his father informed him. "Indeed! And what had Jim to leave behind him besides his character?" "The insurance money." Yes, Jarvey Peel's present. £20,000, eh?" "And accumulations," supplemented Lady Jim. "But need we talk of such things now?" and she sighed the conversation back to sentiment. "Quite so, quite so," quavered the Duke, shaking his head. "Terrible loss to you, my dear, and your natural grief, and hum." Further fossilized phrases escaped his memory. "I certainly feel for poor Jim," said Leah, with sedate dignity. "He had his faults, of course, but then so have I." "Your kind remembrance of Jim excuses the few you possess," was Pentland's reply, while Frith, compressing his thin lips, made no remark. Indeed, there was no chance, for Hilda clamoured that Leah should come to her house for beef tea and consolation. She had never agreed with her more sceptical husband about the Curzon Street menage, and credited Lady Jim with the requisite virtues of a genuine widow. "Your strength must be kept up, dear," she babbled, as though she expected Leah to faint then and there. "I know exactly how you feel, just as I should if Bunny became an angel. But we must all die, dear Leah, and death is the gate of life, and—" "Can't you leave these proverbial condolences to Lionel?" broke in her exasperated husband. "Oh, Bunny," with a wail, "the sacred dead!" "Let the child talk," commanded Pentland. "She expresses my feelings." Thus encouraged, the child did talk, and Lady Jim listened with a bent head to original remarks about time, the great consoler, and meetings on a golden shore, to part no more, and keeping the loved memory green, and bowing to the inevitable, and such like official utterances, without which no funeral is complete. When Hilda stopped for want of breath and memory, Leah kissed her with the affection of one deeply moved, and observed that she was tired. And indeed she was, bored to death, in fact. So the Marchioness, pleased with her plagiarized eloquence, took leave tactfully and tearfully on the Duke's arm. Frith lingered. "Why don't you laugh?" he said dryly. "At Hilda in the pulpit? Why should I? She means well." "Ha! I allude to your demure listening. I do not wish to speak ill of the dead, and after all Jim was my brother. But are you really and truly sorry?" "In a way, if you will press for an answer. One can't live 5 years with a man without missing him at the breakfast table." "Hum. Though you and I pretend otherwise, to console my father, we know that Jim was no saint." "Am I?" she asked, shrugging. "Politeness forbids my answering that question." "I don't see what politeness has to do with this interview. Have you remained to make yourself disagreeable?" "On my honour, no. You're a clever woman, Leah, and as a scamp's wife you have conducted yourself admirably." "As I am now the scamp's widow, had that not better have been left unsaid?" Frith shrugged in his turn. "I suppose so, since we have agreed to call black white. But I waited to say that I'll help you in any way you wish." Leah was surprised and touched. She and Frith had never been good friends. Apparently he was not such a bad sort after all. But what was behind this offer? Her ineradicable suspicion of human nature made her doubt, though she spared him the question. "It is very good of you," said she cordially, "but with the insurance money and this house, which your father says I can retain, I shall do very well. There is no need for you to open your purse or your heart." The Marquis hunched his shoulders and let them drop. "Hum," he repeated, biting his forefinger. "You will be marrying again?" "What has that to do with you?" she flashed out haughtily. "Well, you bear our family name," he reminded her, "and Demetrius." Lady Jim felt qualmish. "Demetrius?" she echoed faintly. What could Frith possibly have to say about the prime mover in the plot? "The man is crazy about you," said he, frowning. "I can't help lunatics being at large," said Leah, reassured as to his meaning, and at once on the defensive. "Have I encouraged him?" He hastened to protest. "Oh no. As I said before, your conduct as Jim's wife has been admirable, truly admirable. But I should not like to see you marry Demetrius." "Why should you think me willing to do so?" "I don't, since the man is a foreigner, and poor and untitled." "He can be a prince, and wealthy, if he chooses to be reconciled with the Russian authorities." "Even then, Leah, do you really like this man?" "As a clever doctor and an amusing talker, yes." "Well?" Frith, baffled and perplexed, bit his finger again. "He is devoted to you. They talk of it at the clubs." "No, no," hurriedly, as she turned crimson with indignation. "There's not a word said against you. But this absurd infatuation, and you a widow. These foreigners go to ridiculous lengths. So you see " "I certainly do not see," interrupted Leah, with conviction. "Did you offer assistance so that you might meddle?" "Oh no, no," protested the Marquis, looking shocked. "But you have behaved so well as Jim's wife " "That is the third time you have said so, and I am by no means stupid. It seems to me," she looked straight at him, "that you believe M. Demetrius will ask me to marry him." "Yes, I do think so." "Will it ease your mind if I say that I have no intention of accepting any impertinent proposal he may make?" "It will, and it does," said Frith bluntly. "I should not like to see you throw yourself away on that man. Should you marry again, it will be entirely my own affair." Of course, of course. All the same quite so. Good day, Lord Frith." He smiled grimly, seeing that she would not permit him to finish a single sentence. "Am I to take your use of my title as an intimation that we are to be strangers?" "To the extent of supervision, yes." "But you can't manage things unaided." "That also is my business. As your interference is concerned with M. Demetrius, and I have set your mind at rest on that point, there is no more to be said." "As you please." Still this Demetrius. Oh, Demetrius, she echoed, enraged by this parrot repetition. I never wish to hear his name or set eyes on his face again. This was true enough. Now that the Russian had served her turn, he could go hang. She had no further use of him, and he could whistle for his well-earned wages. When Frith, after further interrupted expostulations, took his leave, Lady Jim sat down, chin on hand, to consider this town talk. The love-sick babbling of Demetrius troubled her little. No scandal could attach to a Diana who never hunted the noble quarry man, and Leah was such a known lover of herself that even scandal refrained from giving her a rival. Still the Russian was pertinacious and could be vindictive. He had fulfilled her bidding for a certain price, and that price he would assuredly demand. Make him her second husband she would not. He belonged to Katinka, who could keep him and welcome. The remembrance of the daughter suggested the useful father. Aksakoff, unfettered by honourable prejudices, certainly could help her for the attaining of his own ends, if Demetrius became troublesome. Could she lure him to Paris, his disappearance from her life would only be a question of days, perhaps hours. But for the moment she did not see how to export her accomplice to Siberia, via the gay city, without becoming a more active agent than was wise. One Russian had her, there was no blinking the fact, under his thumb, and to remove that pressure in the only way in which it could be removed meant the substitution of a similar thumb. She would merely jump from the frying pan into the fire, both equally uncomfortable. On this account, and lest she should exchange King Log for King Stork, Leah hesitated to enlist Aksakoff's assistance. Luckily there was no need to come to an immediate decision. She had 3 weeks at least to consider the matter. The funeral, the procuring of the insurance money, natural grief for the tricking of the world, and the regulation period of mourning. She could oppose these obstacles should Demetrius press his suit unduly hard. This being so, she flung off the burden for the time being, although the necessity of settling the matter sooner or later haunted her thoughts. Such insistence of the disagreeable broke up her rest, and she would waken at dawn to plot escape. Chloral occasionally aided her to sleep the difficulty out of her head, but she detested drugs that demand extortionate repayment for their kindness, and used narcotic discreetly. A week of these haggard hauntings aged her. Anxiety became apparent in hollow eyes and colourless cheeks. One day, with outspoken horror, she discovered an entirely new wrinkle, and noted later that the unexpected opening of a door caused her nerves to jump. Kind friends ascribed such things to commendable sorrow for the dead, and Leah tacitly accepted their comforting and petting on this obvious plea. But not to regret 1,000 gems would she have risked her beauty. As after her tongue, for Leah put brains before looks, it was her keenest-edged weapon with which to fight the world, and was supremely powerful to control fools. Daily the stream of sympathizing friends rolled through the dainty drawing-room, and bore Lady Jim away from comedy grief to more pleasant shores, where gossip of he and she, and the tertium quid, interspersed with millinery discussions and shrewd female handling of current society events, made things more tolerable. Lady Richardson babbled herself in with a box of chocolate from Sir Billy, a consolation not unpalatable to Leah, who liked Billy and loved sweets. Both being acquired tastes, said Lady Jim, but not to the little mother. "So thoughtful of him, isn't it?" chattered Lady Richardson, who was coloured in subdued tints, with a gown to match, for the visit. "The dear boy! He said to me that we must prevent you from breaking your heart." "And prescribes eating," said Leah, humorously. "I never knew Sir Billy was so young. Thank him for me, Fanny, and tell him that when I think of taking a second, I'll give him a look in." "Oh, Billy has thought of that already, such a boy as he is. You're sure to have a badly spelt proposal from him, dear. But seriously speaking, will you?" "Oh, of course you will." "Why should I? You have not." "My heart is buried in the grave of Billy's father," murmured Lady Richardson pensively. "Dig it up again." "Well, there's Reggie Lake, of course, but he's so poor." "All the more reason that he should propose. You have a good jointure." "Settled entirely on myself," said the little woman, shrewdly; then added romantically, "I must be loved for myself alone." "Oh!" Lady Jim shrugged. "If you expect miracles " "Really, Leah." Her visitor became pinker than her rouge. "I mean that men are selfish, dear. They always have their eye on the cash box, you know." "I hope that won't be your fate, darling," was the spiteful reply, for Lady Richardson always scratched back. "Oh, my face is my fortune, Fanny. Jim, poor dear spendthrift, has left me with only a few thousands, which won't last long." "I should think not, in your hands, dear. But there is Mr. Askew and Dr. Demetrius. Both admire you." "Admiration does not necessarily mean marriage, and at present I think more of my loss than of a second husband." "So sweet of you, and so proper. But you might take a look at the market. Mr. Trent, now, the South African, he's a millionaire." "So I should think, from his manners." "Lord Canvey would give me a grandmother-in-law of the worst." "Sir Jacob Machpelah?" "The man who has taken his name from Abraham's cemetery. I suppose he thought it sounded Scotch. No, thanks. My name is Hebrew, but my tastes are Gentile." "Johnny Danesbury?" "A penny doll with a squeak. I want a man. Colonel Harrington. He's a brute without instinct. I begin to think you keep a matrimonial agency, Fanny." "It wouldn't pay, were you my only client," retorted Lady Richardson, still remembering the miracle dig. "No one seems to satisfy you. I believe you mean to marry Askew, after all. What of him?" "He's a nice footman, and doesn't ask wages. Aren't these suggestions rather premature? My heart, like yours, may be in my husband's grave." "I didn't know he was buried yet," said the little woman, crossly. "How impossible you are, darling." "Always, when people get on my nerves, dear." "I believe you want some other woman's husband." "Oh dear, no. I never covet my neighbour's ass." Shot and shell were flying rather thickly, and seeing no chance of planting her flag on Leah's bulwarks, Lady Richardson beat a discreet retreat, with Judas kisses and Parthian shots. "So glad if I have cheered you up, dear. Kiss. Bear up and don't break your heart. Kiss, kiss. So sweet your sorrow, and so genuine. Kiss, kiss, kiss." And having given several Rolands for one Oliver, Lady Richardson departed. "Cat," said Lady Jim to the closed door, and settled to munch Billy's chocolates over Marcel Prévost's Lettres d'une Femme. CHAPTER XX. Chapter 20 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 20. The supposed remains of Jim Kaimes duly arrived on British ground in charge of an extraordinarily anxious medical attendant, and Lord Frith arranged for their transfer to Firmingham. There Leah was already established as Niobe, studiously dismal in the jet-trimmed, crape-flounced equivalent of sackcloth. With the Marchioness, a few decayed cousins, and many hired mourners, connected closely or distantly with the family, she assisted the Duke to lament his Absalom. Therefore, behind lowered blinds, in the twilight atmosphere of the great house, did officially grief-stricken relations move warily on tiptoe, speaking in hushed voices, with downcast eyes, of the deceased and his post-mortem virtues. The apotheosis of the prodigal son, who had thus quietly come home, made the place about as cheerful as a mausoleum. Limiting the solemnity strictly to the family, Lionel was requested to inter Jim's body with the rites in which Jim's soul had never believed. Then for the first time did he behold Leah in her new character, as hitherto a sympathetic letter had excused a personal interview. Now, face to face, Kaimes considered the advisability, as clergyman, relative, and friend, to administer presumably needed consolation. This last straw broke the widow's overladen back. She had wept with Pentland, mourned with kith and kin, enduring also for 3 dreary weeks twaddling platitudes, written and spoken, by meddlesome well-wishers. These exasperating necessities would have been unendurable even had Jim been where he deserved to be. But that she should suffer them, when Jim was rejoicing as Mr. Berring and expecting his share of the money she thus laboriously earned, nearly drove her beyond the bounds of decorum. She could have thrown the novel she was reading at Lionel's head, and barely escaped doing so when he appeared in her sitting room, almost aggressively sympathetic. But reflecting that with the funeral would come a cessation of these aggravations, and mindful that the money was almost in her purse, she asked him to be seated, and prepared to stomach aphorisms. "How good of you to come," she sighed conventionally, then added, to avert, if possible, protracted boredom, "I'm dull company." "Naturally, Lady James, but I rejoice to see that you are resigned." "I'm not tearing my hair and gnashing my teeth, if that is what you mean. I will, if you think Jim worthy of such excesses." "Hush, hush, he is dead." "I see evidences of that on all sides of me," replied Leah, tartly. "Shouldn't you say that he is not lost, but gone before? I believe that is one of the stock phrases of your profession." Lionel moved uneasily. It was difficult to whitewash Jim, and he could not invent non-existing virtues on the spur of the moment. "He was your husband, remember," was his effort to parry this thrust. "Oh, Lord, don't I know it? Would I put up with all this else? Did you come to tell me that Queen Anne is dead?" "I came to cheer you." "Go on, then. Tell me a funny story." The curate looked and felt shocked. "Lady James!" "Lionel, if you preach, I shall scream," cried Leah, developing whirlwind passion, and rising a veritable Bellona. "Or else I'll oh!" She ripped her handkerchief viciously, while sweeping tempestuously up and down. "I don't know what I'll do if you play Job's comforter." Her cheeks flamed, her eyes sparkled, and her voice leaped an octave as she flung the last words at him. Lionel started up, surprised at this sudden anger, and wondered if grief was bringing on hysteria. "Won't you sit down?" said obtuse man, giving the worst possible advice to overstrung woman. "A little sal volatile?" "I'm sick of sitting down, and lying down, and sal volatile, and listening to humbug, and wearing black, and being bothered. I've had more trouble over Jim in his death than I ever allowed him to give me in his life. You say the same silly things every one else says. You parrot. Can't you be original?" "Death is such an old established institution that it is difficult to be original," said Lionel, resuming his chair with a shrug. "Then I shall talk myself. Yes, I wish to speak plainly, and to you I intend to speak plainly, since you are the only man I respect." "Thank you." "I daresay you are priggish," went on Lady Jim, finding it a marvellous relief to speak loudly and without reserve, "but you are honest in spite of it, and you don't gossip, though you are a parson. In trouble I shall always come to you, padre." "You are in trouble now," hinted Kaimes, smiling at her frankness. "Eh? What?" "Yes. Of course Jim's dead." She choked over the lie, and returned to laugh at ease in her chair. "Where has he gone, Lionel?" "Don't, Lady James. I admit that he had his faults." "Be honest. He had nothing else but faults." "No, no. We all have our good points." "Give me a list of Jim's," she suggested derisively. "For the moment I can't think." "No, nor you wouldn't if you thought for a century. Jim is as bad as they make 'em. Was, if you will abuse him." Oh, yes, I forgot. Well, then, Jim was bad, and I don't know if you call telling the truth abuse. Of the most virulent sort on occasions. Are we not all sinners? Speak for yourself, Mr. Humility." Lionel, amazed by this self-canonization, became less Aaron the priest and more Adam the natural man. "You don't call yourself immaculate, surely?" he observed sarcastically. "Did I? By inference. And if no sinner, you must be saint." "Ah, I see. Lamp black or snow white. Grey does not exist. Parsons see the horizon, the doorstep, but no middle distance. Woman is Lucrece or Jezebel with you. I am neither, but a simple woman, as God made me, and as the devil has marred. Foh! In this very room, when we spoke last, I scouted that bogey's existence. If you don't believe in evil existing, you can't in good. No devil, no God, Lady James." "I never knew that the Deity depended upon Satan for his being," said Leah, dryly, "and theology doesn't amuse me. It's cobwebs and spindrift. Talk sense if you must talk." Lionel, hoping to lead her by a side path to further consideration of her spiritual needs, consented to diverge for the moment. "I'll talk money, if you call that sense." "Of course I do. Uncommon sense, as there is so little of it. Money?" She looked at him questioningly. "The insurance on your late husband's life." "Oh, well?" She wondered what he was about to say. "The Duke asked me to interview the lawyers." "Very unnecessary. I know all about the £20,000. Jim left it to me by will." "You underestimate by 10,000. What, £30,000?" Then, in answer to a nod, "Oh, you must be mistaken." Leah was truthfully agitated. Had the golden goose laid 2 eggs instead of 1? "No, your husband's life was insured when he was a child for £20,000, with profits at an annual premium. Mr. Jarvey Peel and his executors paid the money to keep the insurance in force." "Yes, yes, and the principal was payable to Jim at 60, or to any one he might leave it to at death. I, as the widow, take all." She repeated the word 3 times in the purring voice of a cat over cream. "Exactly," assented the curate, thinking she betrayed over plainly horseleech parentage. "And the extra 10,000 is the accumulation of an annual bonus of £15 on every 1,000. "That's 300 a year," calculated Lady Jim, feverishly. "Quite so. Jim was 35 when he died, so 300 a year for 34 years comes to 10,000. 200," supplemented Lady Jim, correcting his arithmetic. "Oh, Lord, £30,200, and Jim never knew he was worth his weight in this gold." "He never inquired, since the money would not come to him till he attained the age of 60. It would have been almost double then," commented the lady, pensively. "What a pity Jim did not live till But no, we should have both been old then, and there would have been no fun. I am content with 30,000. Really I am, Lionel. It doesn't do to be greedy." "You are not," said the curate, ironically, "else you would have again mentioned the odd hundreds." Leah made a ball out of the torn handkerchief and tossed it gaily in the air. "That will do for lawyers' costs," said she, airily, "though I hope the bill won't be so extortionate. £30,000." She sprang up with dithyrambic utterance, scarcely refraining from a war dance. 30,000 golden sovereigns, 6,000 lovely, lovely Bank of England notes. Oh, Vanderbilt! Oh! The sight of her relative's disgusted face curbed her ecstasy. "You think that my exultation over this money is vulgar." "Heartless, at least, since it is the price of your husband's death. To you, apparently, Jim is more valuable dead than alive." "I entirely agree with you," confessed Leah, candidly; then added with impatient anger, "Do you expect me to tell you lies?" "You might show some grief." "Heavens! What else have I been doing for the past 3 weeks?" "Assuming a virtue which you have not." That remark is too clever to be original, my dear man. How impossible you are! I wear mourning and cry at the right time, and say things I don't believe about Jim to his father and the rest of them, while to you, who blame me for behaving decently outside, I speak as I feel, only to be condemned. What do you expect?" "To see you exhibit some real grief," said Lionel, who was really angered by her callous behaviour. "You show more genuine emotion over this miserable money than over poor Jim." "Poor Jim!" she mocked scornfully. "Are you going to cry up his virtues?" "He was not so bad as you make him out to be," retorted Lionel, doggedly. "Then he must have revealed a side of his nature to you which he never showed to me," snapped Leah, sharply. "Faugh! What's the use of acting to empty benches? Go downstairs if you want an audience. We are behind the scenes here." "Very allegorical and needless. Can't you be more womanly?" "If I were, the sal volatile you recommend would be needed, I can tell you. Being a parson, you will not understand. Being a man, you cannot. Womanly, womanly! Does that imply cant and shams? Am I to mourn with spurious lamentations that selfish profligate who would have broken my heart had he ever possessed it? To be womanly is to excuse a man's faults, to lie down and be trodden upon, to condone unfaithfulness, and to be grateful for the shreds and patches of an egotistic life. Never, never!" Her lips twisted scornfully, her nostrils dilated, and she clenched her hands to restrain an outburst of that wrath which had consumed her during 5 years of holy matrimony. Lionel, astonished by her sudden transition from gay to grave, forbore interruption, and she declaimed her marital wrongs in a Boadicean vein. "I've read in that Bible of yours of the casting of pearls before swine. Jim was a Gadarene pig, who would have rent me had I loved him, as I admit a wife should love her husband. My coldness, and what you consider my selfishness, was my sole safeguard against ruin and sorrow and outrage. You know that I speak the truth. I defy you to say otherwise. Jim, oh, Jim!" She laughed unpleasantly. "Jim, that rag doll of his family, who is placed on a pedestal and worshipped as though he were the golden idol he never was, and never could be. I respect the Duke much more than I ever respected my husband, for he is genuinely blind to Jim's faults and mourns honestly. But you who knew the man and rebuked the man, oh, it would be amusing were it not so shameful." Her bosom heaved as she hurled this speech at him, with gibe and jeer and ironic laughter. "I thank God that the man is out of my life," was her passionate cry. "Yes, I thank God." "Did you believe in God, you would not say that. Bah! Theology again." "And truth." "Which is not theology, and never will be." "That depends upon belief. The science which treats of God and of man's duty to God cannot be understood by you who have neither hope nor faith." "At least I have charity, the greatest of the three, which you lack." "Give me an example." "I credit you with honesty, while you cry me down as a bad woman." "Pardon me, I do not say that you are bad. Misguided, rather." "And why? According to your lights. Because I do not put up Jim as a pig idol to worship with crocodile tears." She silenced Kaimes for the moment, as there was much truth in her overstated contention. No decent woman could have loved or honoured the dead man, and this outspoken condemnation, provable in the main, was assuredly more honest than pretended laudation and sham sorrow would have been. Yet the merciless indictment jarred on Lionel's sense of propriety, righteous as he knew it to be. "The man is dead," said he testily. "Leave him to God." Leah held her peace. It annoyed the ordinarily self-possessed woman that for one fierce moment emotion should have overleaped judgment. Reining in her passions, she relapsed into the sober jog-trot necessary on the rutted road of conventionality. But Lionel's final speech provoked a laugh. Would his laudation of the dead, she wondered, change to criticism of the living did he learn the truth? Feminine desire for the last word would have blurted out this final argument, but that an innate masculine discretion recommended silence. Therefore did she compromise with a laugh, which Lionel, misunderstanding, resented with the warmth of a generous nature. "That is positively cruel," said he, indignantly. "Very human, I think," said Lady Jim, yawning away the reaction. Following his own line of thought, the curate did not traverse this statement. "A woman can make of a man what she pleases." "Possibly. But I had a beast to deal with. Can't you think more kindly of him now that he is gone?" "No," said Leah, decisively. "I would not say so to every one, but I do to you out of respect for your character." "I am both flattered and grieved. Be lenient, Lady James. Are you so good yourself that you can refuse charity to the dead?" Leah shrugged her shoulders and crossed her feet. "That's a trifle personal, isn't it?" she asked, good humouredly, like the rest of this futile conversation. "Well, for the first time and the last, I shall pay you the compliment of defending myself. To begin with, my friend, your definition of good and bad depends upon dogma, so we disagree at the outset. Let us take the primary instincts of being, and oh, I fear we have not the time to begin with Genesis. What is left of poor Jim arrives in charge of M. Demetrius within 2 hours, and I must prepare myself for the scene there is bound to be. To be brief in my defence, I can safely say that I am better than most women. I never gave Jim the chances he gave me of appearing in the divorce court. I keep my temper, even when most provoked. I don't say nasty things about those who run me down, and always help those I like. I avoid the use of slang and of excessively strong drink. I neither smoke nor indulge in morphine. I invariably go to church with half a crown for the plate, and I think that includes all my virtues. What more would you have?" "Unselfishness," responded Lionel, gravely. "Egotism is your sin." "And the world's. I might inquire with the apostles, and I do inquire with all curiosity, who then can be saved?" "Those whose merits do not spring from the ego, as do yours. To you, Lady James, Satan comes in his favourite guise as an angel of light, and only the ethereal spear of the Holy Spirit can unmask him. Virtuous, I grant you are, because you pamper self too much to sacrifice your position and comforts to a love that is willing to lose the world for love alone. Good-tempered, why not, with a healthy body and an equable nature. That you do not gossip is certainly a point in your favour, although I suspect that this abstinence is again the ego, which does not permit you to be sufficiently interested in others to discuss their affairs. You help those you like, feed them, as it were, with the overabundant crumbs from your table. In the words of our Lord, I can say, 'Do not even the publicans so?' But would you help those you hate, and at a sacrifice?" "Certainly not. Why should I? They would not be even grateful." "Quite so. You expect a reward for your good deeds. In this world you look for yours in the next." "No, though I admit that the temptation is strong. I try to serve God out of love and gratitude." "Ridiculous, even if true. Such self-abnegation is beyond me." "Yes, that is what I call being really and truly good." "I see that is, I don't see. You are always so impossible." "Nothing is impossible with God's help, as without it nothing is possible. Listen, Lady James." And with his soul on fire to raise her from the material to the spiritual, Lionel attempted reasonable argument. For over half an hour did he preach, expound, warn, demonstrate, quote, deduce, persuade. But at the end of 35 rapid minutes he found her and himself again at the starting point. Leah listened critically and even with interest. Hindered by her limitations from seeing a satisfactory conclusion, she declined the tournament and retired to watch her opponent tilt at giants which she mistook for windmills. Said the inversely deceived Donna Quixote. "How well you talk, Lionel. Why don't you leave the church and go in for Parliament?" The curate shook the cold water of this douche out of his ears, and rose markedly discouraged. "I cannot make you understand," he said sadly. "Only the Holy Spirit can convince you of your need." "My need of what?" "Of salvation." "That would be adding sugar to honey, and I feel very contented with my honey. Good health, plenty of money, a tolerable position, and you have yet to reckon with God. All these things come from Him, and all He can take away." "I don't agree with you, nor will you until your pride is broken." "That it never will be," said Leah, superbly. "So you think in your insolence of beauty and health. But when you come to die?" "Well, then I shall die, and that's all about it." "What is the glory of the rainbow to the colour blind?" Lionel asked himself, and walked to the door. There he paused to deliver himself of a final warning. "Though you triumph in your own strength, and be at ease in the palace of sin, yet will the reckoning come. The Most High God is." And he departed. Words, words, words. That was Lady Jim's summing up of the interview. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 21. In that chilly hour preceding dawn, under the searching grey eye of earliest morning, the coffin was opened in the presence of Pentland and his family. The likeness between the lawful son and the unlawful, even more apparent in death than in life, startled the woman best prepared to countenance a gross deception. Leah could almost have imagined this waxen, awful face to be that of Jim, and an emotion of genuine fear shook her to the soul she had so deliberately burdened. Moreover, and not without reason, that haunting thought of an assisted death became appallingly obtrusive before these medicated remains. Was she guilty of? Her will fought desperately against the suggested word, and this mental struggle still further compelled the revelation of elemental feelings. Streaming tears, trembling hands, furtive glances testified to truthful terrors breaking through calculated pretence. It needed a scornful look from Frith the sceptic, and an amazed stare on the part of Demetrius, to assure her that she beheld a corpse of no importance, save as a substitute for a living double. And even then this ironic inspection of the false seemed but a gruesome masquerade of Jim's lying in state when his turn really came. The actuality of her feelings afforded a welcome escape from further harrowings, and she left the room clinging to the arm of Demetrius, careless whither he led her. The picture gallery was his goal, since its seclusion invited no eavesdroppers, and here he experimented with personally manufactured salts, pungent and rousing. These, it soon appeared, were scarcely needed. Lady Jim, released from the necessity of playing a grim comedy, recovered speedily, and with recuperation came the disposition to flick away the disagreeable. "What a fool I am!" said Leah, enraged to discover she was but mortal. A woman, murmured Demetrius, cynically complacent. "But no heroine. Ugh!" She shivered and huddled in her chair. "I shall dream of that thing for the next year. It was so like Jim. Ugh, ugh! Horrible, horrible!" "Why should the sight of an empty house so startle you, madame?" "I am in no mood for metaphors. Go away. You will be needed to shut that thing up." "My successor, the undertaker, will do that. I have done my share." "I only hope you have not overdone it," muttered the woman. "And the meaning of that remark, madame?" Leah, wanting to know yet, fearing to know, evaded an answer and shirked a question. "Leave me for a time," she entreated. "No, if you will pardon my rudeness. We have much to talk about." "Cannot you wait till after the funeral?" she said crossly. "It will look so strange, your remaining here with me." "Ah, but no, madame. To those who might speak, I am but your doctor, who has brought you here to recover yourself." "I am perfectly recovered, perfectly." "In that case we can talk," he insisted. She yielded, not being yet her old fighting self after the soul shaking. It was dangerous to enter upon a contest with flawed armour, so she temporized. It would be best, she decided, to hear his story without committing herself to comments. Later, when her nerves were steady, she could answer more cautiously the question he was about to ask at an inopportune moment. Her wary nature declined a consideration of marriage arrangements, to the extent of fixing a date for a ceremony in which she did not intend to take part. Still, he could plead, and she could and would procrastinate. Therefore would the victory be with her when this unprepared interview ended. "Talk on," she said languidly, then added with a spite created by shattered nerves, "though I think it very disagreeable of you to make me look on that horrid dead thing." Demetrius was tolerant of feminine irrelevance. "Madame, to avert possible suspicion, it was necessary." "Undoubtedly it was necessary," admitted self-contradicting woman. "But what a risk!" "Ah, pardon. In the dark all cats are grey." "I know nothing about cats, but the faces of the dead certainly vary, Monsieur Demetrius, and dangers cannot be explained away by proverbs." "In this case the danger has explained itself. We are now safe." The plural struck disagreeably on Leah's ear, and reminded her somewhat pointedly of the readjusted relations between herself and the doctor. "We are now safe," she echoed with reproving emphasis. "Assuredly," responded Demetrius, wilfully blind. "Monseigneur has been completely deceived, also M. le Marquis and Madame his wife; while your tears, my dear friend, have washed away any possible doubts, which, for my part, I do not believe existed." Again she was faced by positive circumstances, for the Russian's last words hinted a sarcasm which annoyed her. It might be that, with still quivering nerves, she looked too anxiously for causes of offence, but the familiar ease of his manner was unpalatable. A second implied rebuke would avail as little as had the first, and Leah, mindful of her dignity, abstained from indicating in words the Rubicon he was not to cross. Demetrius knew overmuch for her to speak authoritatively, so it was necessary to permit him the odious intimacy of an accomplice. But he should pay hereafter for his usurpation of such a position, that she vowed inwardly, even while smiling on his success. Smiling was possible now, as the prospect of an inevitable verbal duel braced her to abnormal self-control. "Sit down," she commanded abruptly. "I have yet to learn details of your scheme." "Our scheme," he reminded her. "You flatter me, M. Demetrius, since I cannot take credit for your clever inventions." "We are all in the same boat, madame." "You, I, and?" She glanced at him inquiringly. "Your husband." "Can you not grasp the fact that I am a widow? When I have a husband," she smiled meaningly, "do you think he will sanction Mr. Berring rowing in the boat you mention? Suspicious people are the easiest to gull, and the smile rather than the words changed the gloomy doubter into a confiding child. Her enforced diplomacy was gaining her ground already. "My angel, you mean?" Leah cleverly shortened a possible rhapsody. "Of course I do. Ah!" with a sentimental sigh. "What have I done to be so doubted?" "Never by me, I swear. Believe me, soul of my soul." "Hush!" She raised an admonitory finger to check dithyrambic wooings at an untoward moment. "We are yet in the wood." "Out of it, while here yes, here, where you so sweetly promised we should become one." His voice sank tenderly. "After certain preliminaries had been observed, M. Demetrius." "Say Constantine." "As you will, Constantine. I can deny you few things after what you have done." "Yet what you deny is what I desire." Lady Jim displayed impatience at this headlong haste. "We are not in Verona, nor will your age permit you to play Romeo to a Juliet of my temperament. When my husband's body is buried," she laughed consciously, "and my months of mourning are ended, then well, then ah, be patient, Constantine." "Am I not to touch your finger tips meanwhile?" "If it is any satisfaction"; and she gave him her hand to mumble, ruminating meanwhile on this shrinking of giant to dwarf. The unendurable lasted half a minute. Then, "Be sensible, M. Demetrius." "Ah!" The child sighed for his lost rattle. "You descend from poetry to prose." She nodded. "Would you versify explanations?" "Explanations?" "Necessary ones. How did you transfer Garth's body to Jamaica?" The doctor looked piteous. "To think of wasting this golden hour," he murmured. "Oh!" The ejaculation was careless, but the instinct was to box a dullard's ears. "Business before pleasure, M. Demetrius." "At least, Constantine." "M. Demetrius," she repeated inflexibly. "We are to marry? Well and good. But beforehand I must understand my position as a Russian princess." The pessimism of the Slav asserted itself in renewed doubts. "I am a simple doctor, madame." "Very simple, if you imagine. But that can be discussed later. Come," cajolingly to a hesitating and sullen being, "an account of your adventures must prove amusing. Cheer me up for the funeral." This extraordinary conclusion staggered a man not easily moved to amazement. "Mon Dieu!" Then in English, "You were weeping some minutes ago, madame." "And I may be weeping some minutes later," she retorted, suppressing rising irritation. "I ask explanations rather than give them. Tell me how you managed." Shrugging away a question relative to female weathercocks, Demetrius reluctantly obeyed. He desired love talk, and she hard facts. But naturally her subject forced his subject out of sight. Man being romantic and woman practical, the latter invariably clips the former's wings, lest he should soar beyond the necessities of her hour. Moreover, his pinions rendered useless, Demetrius could not dispute common sense views. Thus dexterously managed, did he yield to a puppet, Fate, the strings of which were pulled by obstinacy and selfishness, blended into what Leah called firmness. She was an adept at ticketing her vices virtues. "That poor Garth." The doctor mentioned his late patient thus endearingly throughout the narrative, "died of consumption." "Of consumption?" Leah put the question she had been shirking for so long, with nervous emphasis and with short indrawn breaths. "Assuredly, and earlier than I expected. There was no need to " "I know, I know. Do not put it into words." She fiddled with her handkerchief, looking up, down, everywhere except at her companion. "Did he suffer much?" was her inquiring whisper. "Not at all. He died in his sleep. Pray do not alarm yourself, madame. The release was a happy and an easy one." "I am so glad, so relieved," murmured Lady Jim, seeing the spectre which had long haunted her pillow dissolve into thin air. "You see, I thought that is, I fancied" she hesitated, and passed her tongue over dry lips. "The need did not arise," explained the doctor, answering somewhat contemptuously her unspoken fears, "although I was prepared to No, do not shudder. There is no blood on my hands, nor on yours. We can marry in peace." The doubly false prophecy of the last sentence provoked her into ignoring the entire speech. "Go on, please go on. Garth died a natural death at Funchal. Well?" "I did not say that, madame." "Absurd! Why, your explanation?" "Is yet to come, if you will accord me a hearing." Whereupon, accepting an impatient permission, Demetrius slipped into the undramatic, literally so, for he avoided oratorical snares, the high colouring of superlatives, and the temptation to dilate on obviously sensational moments. He might have been reciting the alphabet, so dry was his deliver of an advisedly barren tale. One Richard Strange, mariner, so commenced the sober Odyssey, owned and captained a sea gipsy, prowling on ocean highways and in harbour byways for the picking up of chance cargoes. As an instinctive buccaneer, ostensibly law abiding, he lent himself and his tramp steamer to whatever nefarious proposals promised the acquisition of money at slight risks. Thus fitted for the Russian's requirements, secret instructions brought him to anchor in Funchal Bay. With him sailed, for possible restoration to health, a consumptive nephew, Herne by name, also a factor in an admirably conceived scheme. "The dead was necessary for the living, and the dead for the dead," said Demetrius, paradoxically. "What do you mean by that?" questioned Lady Jim, very naturally. "The body of that poor Garth had to be buried in Madeira, madame. Yet being wanted here, to pass as the corpse of your husband, it was necessary to arrange for a substitute." "I understand. Herne was to pass as Garth, and Garth as Jim." Demetrius assented, and proceeded. With his two patients, the doctor lodged at a second-rate hotel, not a stone's throw from the shore. In due time Herne died, and Demetrius, at once transferring the body to Garth's bedroom, induced the surviving consumptive to board the Stormy Petrel, so the sea gipsy was named, for the purpose of informing its skipper of his relative's death. Strange, previously advised, detained the young man, and Demetrius proceeded to bury Herne under the prisoner's name. "An easier task than you would think, madame," he explained, "for the Portuguese landlord confused the names of my patients, owing to his ignorance of their language." "But scarcely of their appearance, I should think," observed Lady Jim, shrewdly. Demetrius shrugged away the objection. "I cannot say that the landlord had studied Lavater. To his uninformed eye, two fair young Englishmen were much alike, and consumption, madam, begets a family likeness in those it afflicts. I assure you that this Portuguese was as satisfied that my poor Garth had died, as is Monseigneur convinced that his son lies in the coffin we inspected." Leah shuddered for the 20th time at the mental picture evolved. "Ugh! What then?" The doctor informed her placidly. As Garth, under a tombstone suitably inscribed, the skipper's nephew was buried, the very fact that he had existed thus being blotted out by a chiselled lie. Then did the sea tramp loaf the word is appropriate overseas to Jamaica at a slow 10 knots an hour, with bad luck, it would seem, to one passenger at least. "He died on board?" exclaimed the listener. "That poor Garth? Ah, yes. As a child did he fall asleep to waken. Demetrius spread his hands, at a loss to supply further information. His ideas of a future state were vague. With an admirably embalmed body on board, the disreputable craft of Captain Strange slipped her anchors in Kingston harbour, but no half-masted ensign intimated her lugubrious cargo. Lord James Kaimes, forewarned by a cipher letter, rode out to inspect an eidolon of himself as he would one day appear. His nerves being shaken by enforced invalidism, he did not appreciate the sight. Also the medicines of Demetrius, given to induce counterfeit consumption and lean, sallow looks, made him fear lest this rascally comedy should deepen into a real tragedy for himself. Those in Kingston with whom he had made acquaintance were not surprised when Demetrius took him eastward to the famous Blue Mountains, in the hope that the healing air would mend his lungs. Nor did any one manifest astonishment when, after a discreet period, news came of his death. Perhaps if these sympathisers had seen one James Berring sneak on board the Stormy Petrel, and had beheld that ship rolling south to Buenos Ayres, they would have expended less pity on his untimely decease. As it was, while Jim foregathered with the skipper, a man after his own buccaneering heart, former acquaintances, government officials, and local doctors were complimenting Demetrius on the clever way in which he had embalmed the late James Kaimes' body with such few scientific appliances as could be at hand in the Blue Mountains. "They had no suspicion, these people?" questioned Leah, abruptly. "I assure you, no, madame. My mummy, you saw it yourself." Leah rose, lest her mind's eye should conceive too vivid a picture. "I shall always see it," she murmured with loathing. "Ugh, what a fool I am! What a fool!" "A woman, a woman. And so, madame, we recommence our conversation." "It has already lasted too long," she rejoined. "Lord Frith" here she stopped, too discreet to repeat club gossip, which might strengthen still more the already strong position of Demetrius. "You were about to observe, madame?" "Nothing. It is of no moment. You are sure all is safe?" "Sure." "As sure as I am that we, you and I, shall be happy." "Sentiment and business mix about as well as snow and fire," snapped Leah, yet ridden by a nightmare memory of that dead face. "But this sailor, whose nephew you borrowed?" "Captain Strange? He will say what I will." "At a price, no doubt?" "Of the smallest, madame. £1,000." "Ridiculous! Extortionate!" "One cannot make an omelette without breaking eggs," said Demetrius, in dry tones. "It would be well not to vex my friend Strange." "Who wants to vex him? He shall have his money. Anything else?" "This letter from your late husband," and Demetrius handed over an envelope directed in Jim's sprawling hand, and sealed with Jim's ancestral coat of arms. "Fool!" was Leah's comment on this carelessness. "Doesn't he know he is dead and is about to be buried?" She thrust the letter hastily into her pocket, and was about to hurry away when she caught a glimpse of the Russian's darkening face. She paused wisely to dismiss him with a compliment. "You have managed splendidly, M. Demetrius." "Do I not deserve to be called Constantine now?" "Yes no that is oh, don't bother." Lady Jim snatched away the hand he had captured. "You foreigners never learn sense." "Are you teaching it to me now?" he asked in a metallic voice. "I am, if you are clever enough to learn the lesson. See as little of me as possible, and don't speak to me at all. When Jim that is, when Garth is buried, we shall see." "But, madame " "Quite so. Consider your objections answered." "They will be answered," said Demetrius, very distinctly, "before the altar of any church you may select." A remembrance of his capacity for being dangerous, and an anxious survey of his narrowing eyes, made her deceptive. She diplomatically employed feminine strategy, against which no man living can manoeuvre. "You doubt me, Constantine," whispered the she Judas, with trembling tenderness. "Will not this?" She bent forward to drop a butterfly kiss on his forehead, and left him dazed in the seventh and most exalted paradise of fools. "Foh!" said Lady Jim, when shut up in her own room. There she read the communication from her legally deceased husband. It narrated a story similar to that detailed by Demetrius, but scarcely so concisely. Mr. Berring showed a disposition to ramble, and his excursions ended on every occasion in a command to send half the insurance money at once, the last two words being aggressively underlined. He was in the best of health, on his way to Buenos Ayres, thence would travel to Rosario, where that woman lives, commented Leah, tearing off the address and carefully burning Jim's maunderings. "Half the money, eh? £15,000? I think not, Mr. Berring. That captain, too, with his absurd charge, and after all my trouble. I wonder Demetrius does not claim his share also." It would have been cheaper had he done so, since she possessed the money, and he intended to possess her. But he would refuse a cheque and claim her hand, as she reflected with impotent rage. What a pity she could not pay him off, and, along with Jim and Strange, dismiss him into limbo. She did not exactly know what limbo was, or where it was, save that once there these people could not bother her. But with all the will in the world she could not get out of the apparent cul-de-sac she had walked into. "Demetrius wants me and these other beasts my money," she raged inwardly. "What a mean advantage they all take. Pigs! As though I worked for nothing. What is to be done? What?" This question was difficult to answer. Jim she could bamboozle with a small sum, since he could not well betray her without laying himself open to a charge of conspiracy. But the Russian and the skipper, both adventurers of the most reckless type, would assuredly demand their wages. "I shall have to pay that captain," she decided regretfully. "But Demetrius, insolent little creature, he shall go to Siberia, even if I have to kiss him again. Faugh!" Then she descended to tell the Duke how the sight of poor dear Jim's face had broken her up entirely. Yet people said that Leah Kaimes had no sense of humour. CHAPTER 22 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 22. A sociable undertaker, lacking the indispensable humour of his brethren, bitterly complained that he rarely inquired after a friend's health without being suspected of business motives. Ex-Lieutenant Harry Askew found himself in a similar predicament, since his desire to marry a widow precluded him from offering sympathy. That he should personally, or by letter, deplore the necessity of crape caps would suggest waning affection, while a congratulatory address laid him open to the charge, which this especial widow would certainly make, of unseemly dancing on a newly made grave. With laboured wisdom Askew dropped between the horns of this dilemma. Paying no visit, writing no letter, he compromised by leaving a card. In this dexterous avoidance of impalement, Lady Jim read the untold story of his perplexity, and smiled at the diplomatic evasion. There being an exception to every rule, the absence which should have made the Askew heart grow fonder produced an opposite effect. Debarred from the temple of his goddess, he began to ask himself why he worshipped, and thereby dug the grave of illicit passion. That such was now permissible and even praiseworthy, considering its consolatory results, only made him a more ardent sexton. The votaries of Eros can begarland themselves with roses, but Hymen's celebrants wear chains of approved legal pattern. Was the cultus of the matrimonial god worth such encumbrances? Thus Askew inquired of his own pampered self, and not knowing exactly what his selfishness desired, obtained but a doubtful response. What else could he expect? Two-faced Janus is the true god of oracles. Lady Jim was witty, beautiful, chaste, and brilliant, admirable qualities in a woman, but in a wife, unless informed with love, rather unattractive. Askew doubted if a composite mate of this glittering, unwarmed sort would satisfy his somewhat exacting requirements. Accepting too readily the world's definition, what he and it called love was actually selfishness, masquerading. He fancied, and with much reason, that Leah, openly devoted to herself, would not show devotion to him. That is, she being selfish, and he ditto, genuine happiness would not and could not spring from this union of like and like. Moreover, he ignorantly loved in the world's sense through his eyes and with his lower nature, so it was probable that the legal possession of irresponsive beauty would pall. To limit a butterfly to one rose would bore the butterfly, and if the rose were sentient, she also might feel weary. In this way, and from surface feelings, argued Askew, but natural limitations prevented comprehension of the true reason which disinclined him to prosecute his now legal and therefore uninteresting wooing. He was a better man than he knew, and this he would have known had he paid heed to the intimations of his higher self, when it occasionally overcame the lower. When the god within overtopped the brute, he had beheld not so clearly the body as the soul of Lola Fajardo, and had for one swift moment recognized that conjunction with the spirit would best promote his happiness. A genuine marriage must be spiritual, and it is the souls whom God hath joined which man is forbidden to put asunder. Askew's introspective self knew that his allotted wife on this physical plane was Lola, and that to her alone should love be given. But the lust of the eye demanded Leah Kaimes' beauty, and feigned a spurious passion to gain possession. Absence from Lady Jim made him aware that he did not actually love her, and a feeble struggle of the soul, bound in chains of selfishness, revealed that he would do well to seek Lola once more. Hence came the war between light and darkness, wherein the light so far triumphed that the young man sought Curzon Street with more self-control than was desirable in an admitted lover, one, be it known, of the worldly material type only. And may all such, for the well-being of the race, be anathema maranatha. "I took you to be more original," said Leah, when he entered. "Original?" "To the extent of defying conventionality by calling before the funeral. Your grief needed consolation. You declined to console. I come now." "At the 11th and less necessary hour. Besides," she looked meaningly towards the window seat, where a flushed and smiling Katinka adored with timid conversation and eloquent eyes a rather sour Demetrius, "will you have a cup of tea?" "Thank you," and they moved towards the bamboo table, whence she had risen to whisper her greeting at the door. Advisedly, it would seem, since she cast a rapid and satisfied glance at the doctor's lowering face. The set mouth and narrowing eyes, hard as jade, betokened jealous rebuke of Leah's condescending to meet the newcomer as royalty should be met. Reading this index of a mind ill at ease, Lady Jim resumed her seat, tacitly pleased. She had an end to gain, and this over attention to Askew meant the beginning of plots. It was over a month since the supposed Jim Kaimes had been packed away in the family vault, and his widow enjoyed the fruits of her labours. Dr. Demetrius, looking upon the £30,000 as purchase money, wished to possess the woman he had thus bought, and objected to other customers eyeing his bargain. Hence his jealousy discerned a rival in Askew, and Lady Jim, aware of this clear-sightedness, was content that he should so discern. She could neither cajole nor reason Demetrius into trusting himself in Paris, but the desired result might be brought about by utilizing green-eyed jealousy. The unexpected meeting of the rivals afforded her an eagerly seized chance of putting fire to powder. The possible explosion, she hoped, would blow Demetrius into Siberian wilds. Thus, playing with amorous fire, she hastened to heap on lavish fuel. "I am seeing a few friends now," said Lady Jim, ministering to her visitor's 5 o'clock wants. "Mademoiselle Aksakoff and Dr. Demetrius. You know both, I believe. Lady Richardson may look in later, also." Here she checked her tongue. Aksakoff was due in half an hour, but it would not do to advise Demetrius of that. The chances were that Katinka, aware of the intended visit, would carry off the doctor early. Lady Jim devoutly wished that she would. Her drawing-room was no stage for melodrama. "Also?" queried the newly arrived. "Also her son, Sir Billy. Have you met him?" "Of course. Monte Carlo. I remember. Isn't he charming? A D'Orsay of the cradle, Brummel in embryo. I have a mind to marry him as a pocket husband." "Am I to wish you joy?" Leah looked at him suddenly, and understood. This man had risen from his knees, and the chances were, going by experience, that he would stroll away. She did not intend to permit that, since he was necessary to her schemes. Until Demetrius was safely bestowed in Siberia, he would have to be flattered and coerced and ensnared into remaining. Then he could go, and welcome. With freedom and money she wanted no encumbrances, and it vexes a woman to have a man more earnest than herself hanging round her skirts. However, this was not the time for plain speaking, and she answered in this Thalian vein. "Of course you must wish me joy," in a whisper. The smiles of Leah, the attitude of Askew, the sibilant, indistinct voices of both, goaded Demetrius. He all but interrupted the tea-table conference. But since Lady Jim wished to be a princess, she had conveyed that idea clearly, and as Katinka's aid was necessary to the recovering of his birthright, he dared not to offend the girl. Jealous himself, Demetrius knew how easy it would be to arouse the doubts of another, especially of a woman. He therefore remained seated and waited developments, while Katinka chatted earnestly. "I really wish you would be reconciled with my father," said she. "Monsieur Aksakoff is less willing for such a consummation than I, mademoiselle." She disagreed hurriedly. "You are wrong. My father is willing, but your enemies are not." "And my enemies are his enemies?" he inquired dryly. "Assuredly. But one enemy, Paul Petrovitch, is my friend." "Your cousin." Katinka nodded, and proceeded with explanations. "He has, as you know, much influence with the Czar. That would be used on your behalf if" she paused, coloured, and cast down her eyes. "If what?" "If I agreed to marry him." Thin ice indeed, but Demetrius skated extremely well. "Mademoiselle," said he gravely, "I cut myself off from my princely family, and surrendered wealth that I might work the cause of humanity. To assist a brother worker did I risk exile, with the result you behold. Why then should I demand a sacrifice on your part to restore that which I personally do not regret?" "Believe me, my friend, it would mean no sacrifice. You hinted when last we met that you were prepared to consider the proposition of resuming your rank." "I did, contingent on certain events happening," replied Demetrius, thinking that if Lady Jim insisted upon being a princess of the drawing-rooms, he would be forced to yield. "But we can talk of this in a few months. There is no hurry. recalling the necessary period of mourning. "No, there is no hurry." He paused, then questioned suddenly, "You love Paul Petrovitch?" "No, no. Ah, no." "It would then certainly be a sacrifice for you to marry him." "I would never do that." "How then could you persuade him to use his influence?" "It is a case of diamond cut diamond," explained Katinka, with the indifference of a woman to all other honour, save that of the man she loves. "Paul Petrovitch wishes to marry me. If I agree, he will induce the Czar to reinstate you in your possessions. When you have made your peace at St. Petersburg, I could refuse to Oh!" She broke off with a confused laugh. "Do not look shocked, M. Demetrius. I but trick him, as he is prepared to trick me." "I am far from being shocked," denied the liberal minded doctor. "To prevent being bitten, we must bite. But the possible sacrifice " "Lies in lending myself to such a trick. I make it for you for you. Yes. Do you not understand?" Only that stupid animal, a sheep, could have refused comprehension. "I am not worthy," shuffled Demetrius, hurriedly. "I think you are," she breathed tenderly. "Will you not permit me to prove my belief?" "I shall be honoured if in a few months the time is scarcely ripe for me to move, and you will understand. In short, when things are different. Your noble offer we can discuss it later. Believe me" he thrilled her with a light touch "I comprehend the nobility of your nature. Ah, my friend, do not press me to take advantage of so glorious a sacrifice." "So," stammered Demetrius, his confusion being worse confounded, and wrapping up refusal in evasive words, meaningless if sugared. Katinka sighed. Always she pressed her mediatory offer, and always she declined acceptance. Angry that the proffered gift should be flung back in her face, she suddenly felt a sense of outrage at his persistent quibbling. This man must see that she loved him, yet he trifled with her. Too obvious passion. There was Lady Jim, of course, in spite of Lady Jim's readjustment of the situation at Monte Carlo. Yet could any man love this chilly, self-centred Englishwoman? No. As she knew, Demetrius demanded love for love, and he certainly would not give all to Lady Jim without receiving back in kind. Therefore he did not love the woman. Therefore he was heart whole, and being so, why should he not yield to one who was ready to suffer all for his sake? She could not understand, but this she knew, that her self-respect rebelled. And at that moment that feeling, swallowing up all others, impelled her to walk away without even a backward glance. But she remained where she was, since her adoration for this unresponsive god amounted to monomania. She hated to cringe, to cast down her womanly dignity, but she was forced to do so. Passion proved stronger than self-respect, than natural shame, than maiden pride. Enthralled by Venus, as had been Helen of Troy, she was forced to grovel at the feet of this, as she suspected, ignoble Paris. Would he never smile? Would he never unbend? She could not say. She did not know. All she felt was pure unhappiness, and she could have cursed the power which trammelled her in these nets of undesired love. The gods were sporting, and Olympus shook with laughter at her mortal sorrow. "Come when you need me," said she, and rose. Demetrius was self-seeking, yet possessed human feelings, and of these shame was uppermost. The vein of divinity which streaked his clay made him acknowledge that he was using hardly this flouted worshipper. Outwardly, at least, and with an impetuosity alien to his calculating character, he wished to make amends. "Let me come also." "There is no need," she replied coldly, and crossed to the tea table. "You will excuse my departure, Lady James. I have an engagement. Mr. Askew." She bowed, and then went silently out of the room. "Do you follow, doctor?" asked Lady Jim, stepping with him to the scarcely closed door. He did not reply directly, but glanced across her shoulder towards the yawning lieutenant. "Remember," he breathed significantly, and in his turn departed. Leah wondered that the feelings which had evoked the words should not have kept him watchful of her pretty play, and confessed herself puzzled by his abrupt following of Katinka's trail. But having, as she knew, aroused his jealousy, there was no need to consider meanings which would not affect her schemes. Aksakoff was due, and before he appeared it was necessary to teach Askew the role of catspaw. He was to decoy Demetrius to Paris, but of course she did not mean him to be aware of his ignoble duties. She returned to rebuke him for yawning, and to propose a remedy. "What you need is change of scene, if not of society. Now there is Paris, which you probably know well." "I do not know it at all," he confessed. "What a neglected education! I must teach you Paris. Will you be ready for your first lesson early next week?" "I do not quite understand." Lady Jim nodded laughingly. "Which proves that our future is now split into your future and my future." "I am more in the dark than ever," said the amazed listener. Lady Jim curled her lip contemptuously. "You men need so much explanation," said she; then meaningly, "I can still retain you as a friend, I hope." "What do you that is, on what grounds? You do not comprehend." He stuttered, grew red, and writhed over the fire in which she was grilling him with much enjoyment to herself. "Ah, but I do comprehend very clearly, too. When did the change come?" "The change? Of heart, if you wish me to enter into details." "There is no change in me," he denied, still red and flurried. "And no truth, either, when you make such a statement." With a light laugh she recalled his fierce wooing. "You would not attempt to break my wrists now?" "I am very, very sorry that I was rough with you." "Quite so. And cannot you see that such sorrow explains everything?" "Not to me," said Askew, desperately fervent. Leah clapped her hands gaily. "How very badly you do it! Do not go on the stage, I beg of you. Well," she kissed her hand to him, "adieu. I hope she will be happy." "Who will be happy?" "The other woman." "There is no " He caught her derisive eyes, and broke down with an uneasy laugh. "I suppose we have made a mistake." "You have," she replied, promptly emphasising the pronoun. "Ah!" His pride was wounded by the implied indifference. "Then you knew it would come to this?" "Of course, because I did not choose that it should end otherwise. If I had chosen, you would still have been " She glanced smilingly at her slim feet, then handled the teapot with ostentatious liveliness. "You can have some cold tea, if you like." As Askew had intended to drop her, the idea that she was dropping him, and very readily too, was wounding to his vanity. "You never loved me," he declared. "Did I ever say that I did?" "Well, no. All the same " She clasped her hands over her knee, and smiled indulgently at his mortified face. "All the same, you are unwise to explain, so we will change the subject, Mr. Askew." "Ah, not even Harry?" "Not even Leah," she mocked. "Still, you can call me Lady Jim." "Till you change your name." "Certainly not for that of Askew. Señorita Fajardo may think differently when you propose." "How do you know I shall?" he asked sulkily, for every word she uttered fretted his uneasy vanity. "Because you are a shuttlecock between two battledores. She sent you flying to me, and I shall speed you back to her." The young man was almost too mortified to speak. "What a light, vain fool you make me out to be!" "No, you are merely a man in the hands of two women, clay in the hands of accomplished potters. Now," she laid a caressing hand on his arm, "promise me to go back to Rosario at once." "No," snapped Askew, wincing at the touch, and so gave her the very answer she required. Her motive in pelting him with hard sentences had been to arouse his vanity, to assert itself in aggressive contradiction, and for three reasons. Firstly, she did not wish him to make an inconvenient third in Mr. Berring's wooing of the Spanish lady, lest he should learn much that it was undesirable for him to know. Secondly, she required him as her Parisian decoy duck. And thirdly, it was out of the question that he should dare to end the flirtation without her leave. A reflection of these things led her to play skilfully on manly conceit, with the aforesaid result. She was satisfied when he replied in the negative, Askew also, since thereby, in his own estimation, he had vindicated virility, and lacked the insight to see himself her puppet. Having gained her end, Lady Jim apparently yielded to the lord of creation fiat. "Well, then, come to Paris with me and Joan Tallentire. We go on Monday to the Hotel Henri III, Champs Elysees. You can come on Wednesday." "But I don't think " "I am quite sure you don't. Perhaps Thursday will suit you better." "If you insist." "I do not, unless on common sense, of which you possess so little." "How you bully me!" he cried, much vexed by this badgering. "Of course. We always bully those we love as friends, that is. Ah, here is M. Aksakoff. What a surprise!" She rose gracefully and sailed forward with outstretched hand. "So kind of you to come. You know Mr. Askew, I think?" The diplomatist bowed, and seated himself near the table, whereat Askew, devoured by a desire for further confidences, fumed with depressed eyebrows and twisted mouth. Lady Jim rang for fresh tea, listening meanwhile to Aksakoff discussing the safe subject of the weather. Occasionally she glanced with amusement at her victim, who by this time did not know his own mind, and certainly was incapable of analysing his very complicated feelings. She bewildered him, he was not master of himself in her presence, and alternately quailed and rebelled under her spells. Flight from Circe was his wisest plan. "Must you?" inquired Lady Jim, winningly, at the first movement. "Must what, please?" he asked sulkily, settling down again. "Must you go? I see you must. So sorry. Good bye." "I do not want to be bored." "Naturally. A widow is but dull company. Please do not leave us in the dark." "The button is on the right hand side of the door. No, that is wrong." She rose and switched on the light herself. "That is better. Don't you think it is? So good of you to come and cheer me." Then dropping her voice, "Paris?" "I shall cross on Wednesday," he murmured. "Then we can resume our conversation." "What pleasure you promise me!" she retorted, and closing the door, came back to the waiting diplomatist, yawning daintily. "Excuse me, M. Aksakoff, have I just ended a bad quarter of an hour?" "That young man, madam?" "The same. He wants to marry me. Shocking, isn't it, seeing that I scarcely know how to pose as a widow?" "But natural on his part, surely." "How nicely you pay compliments. By the way," sliding away from the subject, "your daughter was here. She has gone off somewhere with your friend M. Demetrius." Aksakoff frowned. "It is kind of you to enlarge my circle of acquaintance, madam. I presume you desire to speak of this gentleman?" Leah raised her eyebrows. "No. Why should I? Our conversation at Monte Carlo." "Did we converse?" "So we did. Something about a sunset, wasn't it?" The diplomatist became unworthy of the name through sheer irritation. "Can we not drop our masks, madam?" "I never knew that we wore such things," said Lady Jim, lightly. "I'm sure I do not. Why should I? But you sent for me." Leah placed her elbows on the table and the tips of her fingers together. "I did, to ask you for some letters to nice people in Paris." "Ah!" His face lighted up. "You go to Paris?" "My good friend, have I not said so? And the letters?" "I shall be delighted." Aksakoff was now beginning to understand the necessity of reading between the remarks. "But are letters necessary? I hope to be in Paris myself next week." "How delightful! You will be able to amuse me. Do not look shocked. I assure you I only wish to drown my grief." "Of course," assented Aksakoff, dryly; then added, with a significance she ignored, "Do you go alone to Paris?" "Oh, dear me, no. Miss Tallentire goes with me, a charming girl who is engaged to my cousin, the Reverend Lionel Kaimes. We stay for a week at the Hotel Henri III, Champs Elysees, very quietly, you know, as I am still mourning." "As you are still in mourning," corrected her visitor, politely. "Certainly. You would not have me flaunting colours with poor dear Jim just dead. I want to be cheered up, and I ask you, Mr. Askew, to cheer me." "Oh, ah!" Aksakoff wrinkled his brow. "Mr. Askew goes to Paris also?" "He said something about it. Such a nuisance, seeing that he thinks well, I told you." "Madame, his thoughts are excusable, but M. Demetrius will be angered." "What do you mean?" demanded Lady Jim, imperiously. Aksakoff's patience was almost exhausted. "We spoke at Monte Carlo," he reminded her. "Surely we understand one another." "Possibly you may. I am quite in the dark. Why should you couple my name with that of M. Demetrius?" "Report says that he loves you." "Oh, report!" She laughed, frankly amused. "If you believe reports." Here a shrug and a contemptuous laugh. "Why, reports leave no one a shred of character. I quite expect that my enemies, Mrs. Penworthy for one, will say that Mr. Askew followed me to Paris for the purpose of marrying me at the British Embassy." Aksakoff admired her profoundly. Without committing herself in any way or for a single instance, she was placing in his hands the thread of the intrigue. Tacitly acknowledging a diplomatic superior, he followed her lead. "I trust that Mrs. Penworthy, whom I have the honour to know, will not spread such a report," he said gravely. "Oh, but she will. A horrid woman, and scarcely respectable. She has called in Dr. Demetrius as her medical attendant, and if, as you say, he admires me, she is sure to make mischief." "Well," said Aksakoff, reflectively, "I am perfectly sure that if M. Demetrius heard such gossip, he would " "Forbid the banns," finished Leah, hastily and derisively. "Pah! Do you think, knowing his danger, he would trust himself in Paris? You are entirely wrong, M. Aksakoff. Our mutual friend left me this very afternoon to follow your daughter. Let him marry her. Now do." "No," said Aksakoff, setting down his cup. "Until he surrenders Katinka he is safer in England. In that case, please do not let Mrs. Penworthy gossip him into crossing the Channel." "For your sake I will not," said Aksakoff, dryly, and with every intention of aiding and abetting Mrs. Penworthy. "Will you give me another cup of tea?" She supplied him, and their conversation embraced a variety of subjects. No further mention was made of Demetrius, or of Katinka, or of Askew, or even of Paris. They quite understood one another, did these two clever people. When the diplomatist departed, he kissed Lady Jim's hand with courtly warmth. "You are a charming woman, madame, a truly admirable woman. But" he straightened himself and looked into her eyes "I should not like to have you for an enemy." "What do you mean by that?" asked Lady Jim, artlessly. "A compliment, madame. Believe me, a very high compliment." CHAPTER XXIII